What's up YouTube? So in this video we will be discussing the subject of how do you cut plasterboard like a pro. I do apologise if you have any background noise. We are currently working for a company local in Brighton, the RA Group, and we are working on a loft conversion. So needless to say, it's a live building site, so if there is a bit of noise in the background, I do apologise. But to the video. So we're discussing how do you cut plasterboard like a pro. Now, on the outset, it sounds like it's pretty easy. And in reality, it's not a particularly difficult job, but there are several ways you can go about it to make your life easier. And as such, we're going to look at 5 ways that you can cut plasterboard so that you look like a pro. Let's have a look at those now. So the first way to cut plasterboard is possibly the most easy way that probably most people know, and that is quite simply to get a pencil, a tape measure, and all you're going to want to do, I'll move the camera back a bit, is you're just going to get your measurement. I already got my measurements for the cut I need to do, and you're going to do a measurement at the bottom, at the top, a measurement at the bottom, like so, and then use a straight edge. Just when it comes to using a straight edge, you can use many things. Level is probably the most common. You could use a piece of timber, etc. Just the most important thing to remember is that the straight edge is actually straight. So if you are going to use something like timber, just make sure it is straight. But anyway, you've got your mark at the top and at the bottom. Line the two up. And then with a sharp Stanley knife, just run the knife through it like so. And then bend the board in half. And that's it. As simple as that. So this board is cut, it's ready to go. A very, very easy way of cutting boards simply is possibly the way that you've seen it done loads of times. Nothing wrong with it. Are there other ways to cut board? Yes, there are. Let's look at number 2. Okay, so the second way that you can cut plasterboard is using a tool like this. Now this here is called a Drywall Square, it's called a T-square, something like that, and it is the length of an 8, or the width of an 8x4 sheet of plasterboard. So from here to here is 4 foot long, which means that when you rest your T-square on the board, you can just run your knife straight down the length of the board. There's no making marks or 2 marks, etc. so forth. It's very quick, it's very easy. Now the one that we have here, this is an Empire Drywall Square. We've used several in the past. For us, we think this is the best one. In the United Kingdom, I think they're about £25, something like that. They are very, very good. It's very important that if you were to buy a Drywall Square or a T-square, do not buy a cheap, rubbish one because the very poor ones, they are not particularly square. You can see here on this one here, there are 5 locking rivets holding this in place. This is a very accurate T-square. Even for drywall, it is very accurate. So if you are going to buy one of these, they're not particularly expensive, but just don't buy a cheap, rubbish one. Buy one from a reputable brand. Now, why are these so good? So if we were to get our measurement, which I think was 132 centimeters, so if we mark 132 centimeters or 52-ish inches, like so, so we just write the mark, and then all we're going to do is just bring the square, be a bit closer so you can see. What we're going to do is just bring the square up to the line and then just run the knife down like so. And that's it. No need for pencils. Just a case of a knife and the square. It's very, very effective. It's very, very fast. And then the same again. You just cut the back out. And that's it. Very, very quick. Now, why is this way very effective? Well, unsurprisingly, you're not making multiple marks. You don't need to use a pencil to mark the top and the bottom. Where is the downside? Well, this particular tool is very, very effective when the cuts are square. Now, there is an element of, if it's 5 to 10 millimeters out of square, you can still use that as a straight edge, but it works best when you're doing square, repetitive square cuts across its width. It's an awful lot faster than using the level, and in my opinion, I think it's, if you've got a good square, it's a bit more accurate. So when you're doing cuts across the width, that is very effective. So let's now look at our next way of cutting plasterboard. Tip number 3. Okay, so the third way of cutting a plasterboard like a pro is to use one of these, possibly, other than using a straight edge, 2 marks and a knife like we said on the first one. This is possibly the second way that most people recognize cutting plasterboard or drywall. Now, this is just an old tired handsaw. As you can see, it doesn't need to be particularly sharp. Now here, you can possibly see in the background, we've got to cut over that door frame. Now what I've done here is, off camera, I have just marked the position, or the head, or the cutout, sorry, of the door frame. Now what I have done is I've just marked the down the side of the jamb, and I've just cut that knife line from here to here, so that's already ready to cut. But now when it comes to the head here, what we're going to do is we're just going to use this rubbish handsaw, and just like any other time you use a handsaw, just carefully follow the line. Like so. Now you could use something called a pad saw or a plasterboard saw. You could even use a multi-tool if you wanted to, but to be perfectly honest with you, for how cheap these are, if you've got an old handsaw just kicking around, these are very, very effective. Now, as we said, we've already knifed that line, so it's just nothing more complicated than pulling that out, and you can see straight away it has broken. So we'll just cut that back. Job done. You can see, nice, easy cut. Now, when would you use this? When would you not? Well, generally we wouldn't use this method all the time. A couple of reasons. One, it's not as accurate as using a straight edge and a knife, because obviously you've got that sawing motion. You run the risk of it waving. It also takes quite a bit longer than just using a knife and a tape. However, where is it exceptionally useful? And that is where you have to stop the cut halfway through the board. Now you can see here, obviously we've had to stop it along here, so it just makes it very easy to get an accurate cut. So like I said, we've knifed down that side there before we used the saw, sawed across, and then just snapped it. So it is a very effective way of doing accurate cuts halfway through the board. So tip number 3, or the third way that you can cut plasterboard like a pro, is to use a handsaw. Okay, so the fourth way of cutting plasterboard is to use nothing more than your tape measure and your knife. Now possibly this is the fastest way, and maybe to some the coolest way of cutting plasterboard. Now what we're going to do, if I just push you back slightly and adjust the camera so you've got a better view, is I'm going to take my measurement. So, there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the tip of the knife, and then we're going to put it between our thumb and the tape measure like so. Now I must admit, this particular knife here, the brand is called Delphine. These are excellent knives. Now they are fixed blades, so they don't retract, but they do come in a sleeve. Now what's so nice about these Delphine ones, not only can you store loads and loads of blades, but also it enables you to latch on to the second marker on the Stanley blade, or the craft blade, or whatever you want to call it. So what it means is the blade is sticking out much further. Now these particular knives, certainly in the United Kingdom, you get a lot of carpet fitters and vinyl fitters that use these knives. Very, very comfortable, very good for floor fitting and drywall. Now, so what you want to do is have the blade sticking out as far as possible. Tape measure, and as we've said, you're looking to sandwich the blade on the tape measure like so. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our mark, which is here. If I get you a little bit closer. Now the skill with cutting plasterboard like this is that you don't want to push too hard. So when cutting plasterboard, the mistake is to think you need to cut the board over and over again. You don't. All you're looking to do is break the paper. So it's a nice light cut, and the skill of it is to pay attention so that the tape is parallel at all times. So you need the tape parallel with the top of the board, and you want to keep that straight or 90 degrees. And you want a nice light pull, just cutting the paper. Nice and light. As you get towards the bottom, you'll notice it's difficult, so just turn the blade round and then just come up that last inch or so. Now if you were to look, if I take it off the camera, you can see it's a nice straight cut. This is probably one of those techniques that do take a little bit of practice, but very quickly it's quite an easy technique to pick up. It's probably one of the ones that you see a lot of professional plasterers and those that do a lot of drywall. That is probably one of the methods they use the most. Now for doing cuts across the width, in my opinion, I don't think there's much gain over using a T-square, if I'm being honest with you. That technique is particularly useful when doing rips across its length, and we will look at that in a moment, so you can see the same technique used when cutting down on the length. Now the thing to remember is, let's say, it's an awful lot easier with a fixed blade where the blade sticks out an awful lot further. And just remember that you're only looking to cut the paper, you're not looking to cut into the drywall itself. If you have a look here, so that was a very light cut, you can see straight away how easily it breaks. It just snaps nice and easy. These boards have been sitting in this room for a couple of weeks, so they are they're a little bit, well, damp's probably not the right word, but that's why you're not hearing that nice satisfying click, because they have sat here for a little bit of time. But you can see straight away, very quick, very effective, nice straight cut. Why is this method useful? Well, unsurprisingly, you don't need any extra tools. You don't need any T-square, you don't need any level, you don't need any pencil, anything like that. Very, very effective. What's the downside with this method? You need to be good at it. You need to be accurate. It's very easy when the tape stops, comes out of parallel, that you start getting waves. So if you're not careful, it's very easy to do a cut that isn't very straight. But if you practice that and get very good at it, it is a very quick way of cutting board. So just to show you just how easy it is using that rip cut, just using the tape measure and the knife. We've got this cut here to do, and we're going to do the same thing as what we did on the width, but we're going to do it on the length. Remember we said nice light cut blade against the tape measure, and you're looking to keep this line here parallel. That is the key. Nice and light. Where possible, try not to stop too much, and do a nice long continuous cut like so. If you were to have a look, how easy that is just to get that nice and straight. So it makes it a very effective way of being able to cut board without using a straight edge. So tip number 4, use a tape measure and a knife to cut your boards down. Okay, so the 5th and final way to cut plasterboard like a pro is to use a hybrid tool, and that one is this. We have used these tape measures for years for drywall. It is amazing. It is a 3-meter Hultafors, I think it's called the Talmeter. These things are incredible if you do dry lining. What's nice obviously is that most plasterboard or sheetrock is 8 foot long, so 2.4 meters. These are 3 meters, so it is long enough for drywall. What is amazing about these tape measures is these have a little blade on the tape measure. Now these generally, I mean this one is probably 2 or 3 years old. In fact, it was really funny, the last time we had to replace this is because a DIY I lent it to, he cut it straight through with a pair of tin snips. He wasn't paying attention, he cut straight through the tape measure. These last forever. What's more is for internal measurements, they're amazing because they've got a little tail on the back of it. Makes it super easy for getting accurate measurements. But why are they so good for cutting board? Well, let me show you. So we've got a strip to cut down the side of that door frame, and it is 85 millimeters long, 8.5 centimeters. And all we're going to do is we are just going to measure out 85 millimeters. If I bring you a bit closer so you can see, and very similar to cutting it with a knife, is you just put the tape onto the board and then just gently press and then just slide like so. How neat does that look? Let's just take you off the camera so you can see. I don't know how clear that is, but look how straight that cut is. It's awesome. What's more is, if you're being really lazy, and as most people who watch our channel know, I am lazy, check how you can even use tape measure, close it up, snap it like so, and then just use the tape and just run it along the join there. Job done. Don't even need a new Stanley knife. Tape measure can do the whole thing. So as a hybrid way of cutting boards, it is very, very effective. It is the Hultafors Talmeter. Unfortunately, in no way are we affiliated with Hultafors. It'd be amazing if we were, because we absolutely love these tape measures. The only downside is when you unfortunately drop plaster on them. I will show you a picture, I'll put it right here. We were doing a kitchen last week and we were just having one of those days where we were dropping lots of plaster, and I dumped the plaster right on top of the tape measure, totally covered it. So now on my other one the towel doesn't come out, which is a shame. But this, very, very effective way of cutting board. The blades on them last for absolutely ages. We thoroughly recommend it. It's a really thin piece of metal. But like I say, we have these for years. We never have to replace the tips on them. So tip number 5 for cutting plasterboard like a pro: use a hybrid tape measure like this one to cut your board. Okay, so final bonus tip when it comes to cutting a plasterboard, and it's a little bit as a side point, and that is, so certainly when you're doing a lot of dry lining, it's very common that you have to do things like cutouts for sockets, pull cables through, pull pipes through, etc. so forth. Now, I don't know a single plasterer that hasn't at one point or another decided to punch a hole through with one of these. Yes, just use your hammer and absolutely thump a hole through. I've done it for years as well, but it doesn't look great. It isn't actually easier, and it isn't accurate. There is a better way, and it's a way that we've used for quite a long time. It gives a much nicer professional finish. It is super, super easy. And that is, so for here, you can see we've got a cable that we have got to pull through. Now all we're going to do is we're just going to measure that out. So 5 out there, and around about there. Open the top. Yeah. Right, so you can see here on the board, there is our mark, and then all we're going to use is a 32mm hole saw. Now I think it's 32. It is 32. The nice thing about this is in the United Kingdom, we have what are called push fit stop ends for pipe work. So when the radiator tailpipes have been pulled through, they often cap them off using stop ends. A 32mm hole saw will go over the top of that stop end. So what we use is the same hole saw for pulling cables through as well as the pipe work. But it's just a case of we've got our 2 marks, and then drill through, job done. How easy is that? Nice, neat hole. It's big enough to get all the cables through, but it still looks neat and professional. And it's easy enough if you need to close it up a bit, just to add a bit of scrim tape around it if you need to close it up at all. But you can see on some of the other ones that we've done here how easy and neat that looks. It's just so much easier and gives a much more professional finish. So we thoroughly recommend, just as a side tip as it were, when you're cutting out for your cables, use a 32mm hole saw. Certainly the one that we use is a quick release one from Bosch. It makes it a lot easier for offloading the waste once you are finished. So that is it. They are the 5 tips for cutting drywall or plasterboard like a pro. The reality is there one that is better than the other? No, not really. The skill of it is knowing when it is a good time to use each method. Certainly when it comes to using things like the tape measure and the knife and doing those long cuts, that is very, very useful when you're doing rips of plasterboard. It's an awful lot easier than you snapping a chalk line or using a straight edge. It's a lot easier, it's a lot quicker. However, if that cut is tapering, so you have to cheese wedge it a bit, it's quite difficult to be accurate. It is possible to increase that size or decrease that size as you're going along, but it is difficult to maintain accuracy. So if you have to taper the cut along its length or width, then yeah, using a straight edge works very effectively. Things like the handsaw we mentioned, it is a slow way of cutting, nor is it especially accurate compared to using a knife. However, if you have to stop the cut halfway through the board, that is when you should use this method. You could use, instead of a handsaw, you could use a multi-tool, or you could use a pad saw. Personally, handsaws are cheap, and most of us have an old rusty one kicking around somewhere. So we just think using one of those is an awful lot easier. Things like the T-square, that is without a doubt, if you are cutting boards across its width, that is so fast, and it is well worth investing your money in a reasonably decent one. They are fairly inexpensive. Like I say, that one there is about £25. It is very accurate. It makes life an awful lot easier. It's quite an easy thing just to carry around on the van or the truck. Makes a big difference at the end of the day. The last little nice feature, and it is an unnecessary thing to have in a way, but these are brilliant. They make you very, very accurate. Certainly if you have to cut out boxes. Now we do actually have a drywall plasterboard cutter for cutting out boxes. But again, that's a luxury tool. You don't need those. But when it comes to measuring out for the boxes, using the little tail on the end and measuring off the board that's next to it, makes this very, very accurate. For how inexpensive these are, I think these are around 10 to 13 pounds, something like that. I suppose as far as tape measure goes, that isn't particularly cheap. But generally, we only ever use these for drywall. Like I say, most drywall is around about 2.4 meters or 8 feet long. I appreciate in other countries they have much larger boards, but in the UK that tends to be the only size we use unless we're doing commercial, in which case the boards are 3 meters. But these last for ages. These are very well made, and in my opinion, certainly for drywall, this is probably the best tape measure we have ever had. I think we've had about 4 or 5 of these now. They last for years. Like I say, this one is probably 2 or 3 years old. The blade, because it's so thin, the blade, they don't really wear out. They are excellent, and we thoroughly recommend it. So we hope that some of these tips have proved helpful, likely for the many of the professional plasterers that watch our channel. This is bread and butter for you. We just know how to do these things, but maybe for the DIYers or those that are at home or getting into the trade, some of these techniques have proved to be helpful. Possibly some of those tools that we mentioned, maybe consider investing in them. They make a real big difference, certainly for us when we are working doing drywall. So we thank you so much for watching the video. We hope you enjoyed the content. Consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing if you like what we are showing on the channel, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.